The justice, the path to balance, and your inner tribunal. The tarot isn't just a deck of cards, it's a living architecture of the soul. Picture it as a cosmic blueprint, a sacred diagram where each major arcana represents a station in the evolutionary climb of consciousness. The upper row, that's where the divine archetypes reside, the fool, the magician, the high priestess, all whispering truths from beyond the veil. But it's at the justice card, numbered 8, that the game changes. She doesn't descend with thunder, she waits in stillness, marking a threshold where humanity must stop being spectator and start being participant in its own myth. From this point forward, we're no longer dabbling in dreamland. We're in the thick of it, in the middle row where the laws of equilibrium, karma, and self-awareness reign. This is where the hero's journey shifts from abstract potential to grounded reality. The Justice card, standing firm with her sword and scales, reminds us, you're not just being guided anymore, you're being tested. That sword, it's for cutting through illusion. The scales, they weigh not your sins, but your self-knowledge. Suddenly, every step becomes a matter of spiritual responsibility. The beauty here is how this structure reflects our own inner architecture. Just as the tarot begins with raw potential in the Fool and matures toward divine synthesis, we too journey through layers of unconscious material until we awaken as co-creators of our own path. Justice is the checkpoint where we're asked, are you ready to balance your inner world with the outer one? It's like stepping into adulthood, not by age, but by awareness. And that's not a metaphor, it's a psychological right. You don't cross this gate unless you're willing to look in the mirror and own what you see. This symbolism is echoed everywhere, from the myth of Libra, where balance is cosmic law, to Jung's theory of individuation, where the self emerges only through confrontation with the unconscious. And it's not abstract. Ever faced a moment where your choices felt like they echoed through your whole being? That was your personal justice card. That was you, standing at the invisible altar of your own evolution, holding invisible scales. It could happen while ending a toxic relationship, confronting a lie you told yourself, or choosing integrity over comfort. The tarot structure is not static, it's kinetic. It moves as we move, breathes as we breathe. The cards don't just reflect fate, they invite participation. Justice is not a passive checkpoint. It's a spiritual test we face repeatedly until we get the inner math right. And right after her, what do we find? The Hanged Man, another shift, another layer. But before we get there, we need to understand the force justice embodies, not as a symbol of law and order, but as a living intelligence within our psyche. The symbolism of the Justice card. Justice isn't here to scold you, it's here to awaken you. When she appears, seated in perfect stillness, sword in one hand and scales in the other, she isn't interested in external rules. Her gaze cuts deeper than any courtroom verdict. The sword she wields isn't a weapon of punishment, but a tool of precision. It slices through illusion, helping you see what's real beneath the noise. And the scales? They don't measure your actions alone. They weigh your intention, your integrity, your willingness to stand fully present in your own life. We often think of justice as something outside ourselves, laws, judges, consequences. But in the tarot, justice speaks to a personal, inner alignment. Her message is, balance doesn't come from obedience, it comes from awareness. When we refuse to see both our guilt and our innocence, we fall into projection. But justice, as a divine archetype, invites us to integrate the opposites. We aren't just light or shadow, we're both. Ignoring one side tips the scale. Honoring both leads to individuation. Carl Jung called this the process of becoming whole, acknowledging the dualities within instead of suppressing them. Have you ever had a dream where you're arguing with yourself, or being chased by someone who feels oddly familiar. That's your unconscious pulling you into the court of spiritual justice. Not to condemn you, but to reconcile you with yourself. It's compensation at work, the psyche trying to restore equilibrium through symbols. The tarot does the same thing, waking up the soul through image, myth, and metaphor. Justice also calls us to responsibility. She isn't moralistic, she's metaphysical. That's why she never wears a blindfold in the tarot. She sees everything, especially the parts we pretend not to. And when you work with her energy, say, in meditation or shadow work, she'll show you exactly where you're out of alignment. For someone seeking growth, this is priceless. Journaling your daily moral choices, for example, or reflecting on how often you betray your inner truth, are simple practices that activate this card's transformative power. Justice is a mirror, and her reflection won't flatter your ego. But that's not cruelty, it's mercy. It's spiritual alchemy. She doesn't want submission, she wants consciousness. And once you begin to accept her invitation, you realize she's not a judge at all. She's a midwife for the soul. What's birthed through her isn't a verdict, it's a new level of perception. And in that space of renewed clarity, another tension begins to rise, the paradox of inner conflict, the ceaseless dance of duality that pulses just beneath our surface. Duality and inner conflict. Within every one of us, there's a courtroom with no exit. The prosecution and defense, they're both you. That's the essence of inner conflict. One part of you longs for freedom, the other demands control. One craves chaos, the other clings to order. The Justice card sits right in the middle, not to choose a side, but to teach you how to hold both without collapsing. Her sword and scales aren't just props, they're tools for navigating the eternal tension between spirit and matter, light and shadow, yin and yang. We're taught to choose. Be strong, not sensitive. Be rational, not emotional. But real growth begins when we stop amputating parts of ourselves to fit a mold. Carl Jung knew this well. He said the path to individuation involves making the unconscious conscious. That means facing the very parts of ourselves we were taught to fear. The guilt you carry isn't meant to be punished, it's meant to be understood. The anger you hide isn't demonic, it's a sword you've never learned to wield with precision. Let's make this real. Imagine someone raised to be the good girl or the nice guy. They suppress assertiveness, thinking it's selfish. But years later, that buried part erupts, maybe in rage or passive aggression or chronic fatigue. Justice shows up then, not to shame them, but to say, you can't keep exiling half your nature. She brings the sword to cut away false identities and the scales to rebalance a soul out of sync. That's why inner conflict isn't a flaw, it's a call for integration. This is where the masculine and feminine energies come into play. Not as gender, but as forces. The sword as action, the scales as receptivity. The mind wants clarity, the heart seeks harmony. True balance isn't about silence, it's about hearing both voices fully. Spiritual evolution doesn't mean killing the ego. It means negotiating with it. You're not meant to destroy your inner conflict, you're meant to transmute it. Alchemy lives here, in the heat of the paradox, not in its resolution. And just when you think you've found your rhythm, life throws in a new layer, a deeper contradiction, a sharper dissonance. The dance of duality never ends. But justice never promised peace. She promised balance. And balance doesn't mean stillness, it means movement with awareness. And that movement, when guided by insight instead of fear, becomes the foundation for something even greater. A deeper spiritual process where justice is no longer just a moment, it becomes your path. Justice as spiritual and psychological process. Justice doesn't operate in the outer world first. It begins in the hidden chambers of the psyche. According to Jung, the unconscious has a knack for balancing what our conscious mind tries to ignore. This isn't philosophy, it's daily life. Ever had a dream that mirrored a situation you were avoiding? That's not coincidence, it's compensation. The psyche seeks equilibrium like nature does. When one side of you dominates, too much reason, too little emotion, or vice versa, something inside corrects the imbalance. And guess who's presiding over that inner court? Justice. She doesn't yell or punish. Her tool is insight, and her method is introspection. The spiritual weight of the justice card lies in this. You're always being watched, not by God, but by yourself. Your higher self sees through every mask, hears every excuse, and knows when you're pretending to be a victim of your life instead of its author. And yet, there's no condemnation, only the call to grow up, to sever the umbilical cord of blame and step into spiritual adulthood. That's where responsibility becomes liberation. Think of it like this. Someone goes through repeated heartbreaks, always blaming their partners. Eventually, a dream reveals a neglected inner child, afraid of abandonment, craving validation. That's justice working through the unconscious, saying, the problem isn't out there. It's the story you haven't owned yet. When you take that message seriously through therapy, shadow work, or even journaling, the scales begin to tip. The sword appears to cut through delusion, but gently, precisely. This process isn't cold. It's deeply human. Justice is misunderstood when seen as detached or logical only. She's closer to the wise elder who holds you accountable because she believes in your soul's potential. Her spiritual justice is restorative, not punitive. It's karmic, not vengeful. Saturn's discipline meets Venus's compassion here. And the beauty? This inner tribunal doesn't need a courtroom. It operates in silence, in your reflections, your regrets, and the moment you choose honesty over self-deception. Once you begin this kind of self-inquiry, you realize that justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something that awakens within you. The balance she offers isn't perfection, it's dynamic clarity. And just as you start to embody this inner law, another figure begins to emerge. Not a cold judge, but a sacred feminine presence who has held the scales all along, not with severity, but with a heart full of cosmic mercy. Archetypes and the feminine aspect of justice. Most people picture justice as rigid, cold, even harsh, but that's only one side of her. Beneath the marble throne and sharp blade lives a deeper truth. She is a feminine archetype. Not feminine in the soft and sweet cliché, but in the sacred, intuitive sense. She is Maat, the Egyptian goddess who weighed the soul against a feather. She is Astrea, the last immortal to abandon Earth, carrying the scales of divine fairness. She is Libra in the zodiac, ruled by Venus, a sign not of punishment, but of balance, relationship, and spiritual grace. And here's the twist. This archetype isn't detached. She feels everything. Her discernment doesn't come from logic alone. It comes from deep knowing, from the ability to hold complexity without collapsing into it. Think about a mother breaking up a fight between children. She sees who hit whom, yes, but she also sees the hurt underneath. That's justice. She listens for the hidden pain behind the behavior, the symbolic truth beneath the literal act. Her sword isn't used recklessly. It cuts where necessary, but always with love. When you ignore this Venusian side of justice, you reduce her to a bureaucrat. And let's be honest, most of us have internalized this distorted image. We think being fair means being emotionless. But in spiritual evolution, feeling is intelligence. You can't heal what you won't feel. The divine feminine within justice doesn't want robotic compliance. She wants awareness, the kind that only arises when heart and mind are in sacred dialogue. That's the real alchemy, when judgment becomes wisdom through compassion. Jung recognized this archetypal dimension in the anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche that brings soulfulness, empathy, and inner harmony. When this is repressed, justice becomes tyranny. But when embraced, it becomes transmutation. A person grounded in the feminine justice knows that morality isn't about rules, it's about resonance. It's about feeling when something is off, even when no law was broken. That kind of justice lives in poetry, not policy. It's poetic justice, not courtroom drama. And just when this gentle side of justice begins to feel like a bomb, mythology reemerges to shake things up. A fiery tale of cosmic misalignment, where balance isn't restored by feeling, but by force. Enter the myth of Phaeton, a boy who tried to drive the chariot of the sun, only to lose control and throw the world into chaos. What followed wasn't cruelty, but a necessary act of mercy to restore harmony. Poetic justice and mythological illustrations. Let's talk about myth, the place where truth wears costume, but never lies. The story of Phaeton is a perfect lens for understanding poetic justice. The son of Apollo, he begged to drive his father's solar chariot for a day. Against better judgment, Apollo agreed. But the boy couldn't handle the power. He scorched the earth, froze the heavens, and nearly unraveled cosmic order. Then came Zeus with a bolt not of wrath, but of mercy. One strike, and the chaos ended. Phaeton died, yes, but so did the imbalance. Justice, in myth, isn't always gentle, but it is always wise. This is the kind of justice that feels like tragedy, but reveals deeper harmony. It's not about punishment, it's about restoration. Think about it. How often in life do we see people get what they deserve, only to realize later that life wasn't being cruel, it was recalibrating. Someone loses a job they clung to out of fear, and it forces them into their true calling. A betrayal shatters an illusion, allowing a new life to emerge. That's poetic justice. It stings, but it saves. In the tarot, justice embodies this principle not with vengeance, but with clarity. The sword doesn't swing in anger, it's drawn in necessity. And the scales aren't there to shame, they're there to weigh truth against illusion. Phaeton wasn't punished for ambition. He was a symbol of untempered will, of immature fire. The myth reminds us that cosmic order isn't sentimental. It's precise. When our actions misalign with higher laws, whether spiritual, emotional, or ecological, the universe adjusts. Not to hurt us, but to harmonize itself. And if we're brave enough to look at our lives through this mythic lens, we begin to see the patterns. The heartbreaks that refined our hearts. The failures that shaped our integrity. The moments where we fell not because we were wrong, but because we were growing. Justice operates here, not in the realm of blame, but in the alchemical forge of transformation. She doesn't cry over the fall, she watches what rises from it. But this kind of justice asks for a deeper kind of seeing. Not just the facts of what happened, but the soul behind the story. And where do we cultivate that vision? Not in the court of public opinion, but in the private sanctum of the soul, where silence speaks louder than judgment, where the real tribunal awaits, not outside us, but within us. Inner tribunal and the search for higher justice. Everyone talks about justice like it's out there, courts, systems, governments. But the truth? The most powerful court you'll ever face is the one inside your own chest. That's the inner tribunal, and no lawyer can save you from it. It's where your conscience, your self-awareness, and your soul sit together to weigh every choice, not in terms of legality, but of alignment. It's why someone can get away with something externally and still feel haunted. Because deep down, the soul always knows when we've betrayed our own law. Carl Jung spoke of this when he wrote Answer to Job. He argued that even God must evolve, must confront the shadow within. That kind of statement turns traditional theology upside down, but it's exactly what the justice archetype demands: growth through confrontation. In this inner court, you're both judge and judged. But it's not a place of shame, it's a space of transformation. You don't get sentenced, you get offered a chance to recalibrate. To listen to the voice that says, "This isn't who you are," and actually believe it. External systems of justice often fall short. They reward appearances, punish shadows, and sometimes miss the soul entirely. That's why inner justice is superior. It can't be bought, tricked, or avoided. And the irony? It's the one system we run from the most. We distract ourselves with work, relationships, ideologies, trying not to feel the quiet gnawing that something's off. But the sword of justice doesn't swing in noise, it cuts through silence. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. So what can you do to connect with this tribunal? Simple: sit with yourself. Meditate. Journal. Ask not did I do the right thing, but was I in alignment? Reflect on moments where you compromised your truth for comfort or validation. That's where the real case is being tried. And over time, this court becomes sacred. It doesn't just judge, it heals. It becomes a compass for everything you say, do, and choose. And once activated, it changes how you see the entire world. Because when justice becomes internalized, the world outside starts to look different. You stop chasing revenge and start craving resolution. You stop reacting and start responding. But this depth of discernment requires a different kind of intelligence, one that goes beyond logic into the realm of feeling. And that's exactly where we're heading next. The function of feeling in law in society. Law without feeling is machinery. And machinery, no matter how precise, cannot hold a soul. That's why the justice card isn't just about rules, it's about resonance. When James Hillman and Carl Jung explored the role of feeling in judgment, they weren't dismissing logic. They were elevating the heart as a form of wisdom. Because sometimes the right thing by law is the wrong thing by spirit. A person may win a lawsuit, but still lose their peace. True justice doesn't only ask, "What happened?" It asks, "What's true beneath the facts?" Feeling in this context isn't sentimentality. It's the compass that guides us through gray areas where logic collapses. Think about conflict resolution. Two people can have completely valid points and still end up more divided if feeling isn't part of the equation. Justice, as a divine archetype, knows this. That's why the scales balance, but the sword doesn't swing unless absolutely necessary. You don't punish a child for crying. You sit with them. That's the difference between cold judgment and living law. And society? It reflects our internal development. When we ignore feeling, we create legal systems that are punitive, rigid, and disconnected from human experience. But when emotional intelligence enters the equation, laws become more than rules. They become tools for relationship, healing, and evolution. A judge who considers context, motive, and remorse is practicing spiritual justice. A leader who listens with empathy isn't weak. They're tuned into the deeper rhythm of collective karma. This is why developing your feeling function matters, not just for yourself, but for the world. Start by noticing how your body reacts to situations where something feels off, even when it looks fine. That's justice whispering. Train that awareness. Read Hillman's Revisioning Psychology or Jung's Psychological Types to deepen your understanding. Let your decisions be informed by both intellect and intuition. In harmony, like a chord that resonates fully when the dissonance is resolved. Because the more we allow feeling to shape our sense of rightness, the more society shifts toward equilibrium. It becomes less about punishment and more about restoration. And that shift, once it takes root inside you, prepares the soul for its next step. A step where illusions are no longer tolerated, and the sword of justice becomes not a weapon, but a scalpel for psychological rebirth. Psychological growth through justice. There comes a moment in every inner journey where pretending just doesn't work anymore. That's when the justice card shows up, not to punish, but to purify. Her sword is sharp, yes, but it's surgical. It doesn't aim to harm. It aims to separate truth from illusion. This is the moment where the mask cracks, and you realize that growing up isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. Justice doesn't ask for virtue. She asks for clarity. And clarity, though uncomfortable, is the birthplace of freedom. This rite of passage is sacred and brutal. It's when the fantasies you clung to dissolve under the weight of truth. Maybe it's the relationship you convinced yourself was meant to be, the job that should work, or the identity you wore to be loved. Justice steps in with her sword and says, "Enough." Not to shame you, but to release you, to give you back to yourself. This is psychological growth in its rawest form, the death of illusion and the birth of autonomy. Carl Jung called this confrontation the beginning of individuation. It's not a cute process. It's not Instagrammable. It's sweaty, gritty shadow work. But on the other side of it, power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that radiates. When you allow the sword of discernment to cut through your mental fog, you stop living by default. You start living by design. You begin to choose, not from fear, but from alignment. That's when real transformation begins. Want a practical entry point? Start questioning the stories you tell yourself. When something triggers you, ask, is this a reaction or a revelation? Journal moments when your integrity wavers, even slightly. These micro-reflections sharpen the blade of your awareness. Read Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, or explore inner child healing practices that help dismantle inherited narratives. These aren't just exercises, they're rituals of renewal, clearing the debris for true self-realization. And as the illusions fall away, something unexpected happens. You become lighter, not bitter. Sharper, not harsher. Justice doesn't harden you, it hones you. And the further you walk this path, the more you realize that equilibrium was never about stillness. It's about conscious movement within a sacred tension. And that tension, far from being a flaw, is the very pulse of the cosmic dance. Cosmic harmony and the dance of opposites. If you're waiting for life to finally settle down, you've misunderstood the assignment. Justice isn't here to deliver peace as a permanent state. It's here to teach you the art of balancing motion. The universe doesn't sit still, it breathes. Everything dances, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, chaos and order. The tarot knew this before science did. And justice? She's not static. She's the conductor of the great symphony of polarity. Her scales never stop adjusting, because harmony isn't found in perfection, it's found in rhythm. When you understand this, your inner world changes. You stop seeing discomfort as failure and start recognizing it as movement. One day you're full of wisdom, the next day you're back in your shadow. That's not regression, it's recalibration. It's the natural ebb and flow of consciousness evolution. Carl Jung taught that the psyche is a dynamic system, constantly compensating to avoid psychic inflation. The soul doesn't seek stasis, it seeks wholeness. And wholeness includes contradiction. This is where the law of one whispers its secrets. All is one, but that oneness is experienced through contrast. You can't know the light without the dark, just like you can't master the sword without feeling its weight. The dance of opposites isn't a flaw in creation, it's the choreography of awakening. And when you begin to feel it, really feel it, you realize that equilibrium isn't an endpoint. It's a lifestyle. It's how you walk through heartbreak without losing faith, how you hold ambition without losing presence. So how do you embody this? First, stop chasing purity. Life isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. Embrace your contradictions. Be both soft and strong, wild and wise, grounded and dreaming. Practice inner balancing rituals, breath work, walking meditations, even mindful arguments. Yes, argue consciously. Feel the fire, hold the mirror. That's the sword in motion. That's spiritual justice alive in your blood. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to tune yourself. And as this dance deepens, the archetype of justice becomes less of a card and more of a companion. She walks beside you, not to keep you in check, but to keep you awake. Always listening, always adjusting. Because in this ever-changing waltz between divine intention and human experience, she is both the music and the metronome. And what she wants more than anything is for you to hear your own rhythm and finally learn to move with it.